The morning of the Ashford ball, Elowen pressed a damp cloth to her swollen cheek and told herself she would not go. Her sister Thessaly had made sure of that. But then the Duke of Wrencastle arrived at their door, and he was not asking for Thessaly. He was asking for her. And when his eyes landed on the bruise running along Elowen's jaw, his expression did not soften into pity. It hardened into something far more dangerous. "Cover your face if you wish," he said quietly, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "But I have already seen it, and I still came." Nobody had ever said anything like that to Elowen before, which is exactly why she should have been afraid of what he wanted. If you already have a feeling about where this is going, drop it in the comments and tell us where you are watching from. It helps more than you know. And if this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit the subscribe button. We are just getting started. Elowen had not slept. She had sat at the edge of her bed through the long, dark hours, with the cloth pressed to her face, listening to the house settle around her, and she had made a decision before the sun came up. She would send her apologies to the Ashford estate. She would say she was unwell, which was not entirely a lie. She would stay behind while Thessaly went, and she would be invisible, which was the only thing she had ever been truly good at. That was the plan. Then Dorothea, their housekeeper, knocked on her door just after 7 and told her that a carriage had pulled up outside. Not just any carriage. The Wrencastle crest was on the door. Elowen did not move from the chair. She heard Thessaly's feet hit the floor in the next room, heard the quick rush of her sister's voice asking Dorothea who it was, heard the pause, heard the scramble of Thessaly reaching for her best morning dress before the name had even finished leaving the old woman's lips. The Duke of Wrencastle. That was all it took. Thessaly had been trying to place herself in that man's line of sight for 2 full seasons, and here he was, standing at their door before breakfast. Elowen pulled the cloth away from her cheek and looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. The bruise had deepened overnight. It spread from just below her eye down toward her jaw, purple at the centre and yellow at the edges, ugly and honest in the morning light. She touched it with 2 fingers and felt the dull, familiar ache that she had learned over many years not to make a sound about. Thessaly had rings on every finger. She had not meant to hit so hard, she had said afterward. She had simply been making a point. Elowen covered her face with her hand and breathed. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Dorothea's slow, careful ones, and then a second pair, heavier, unhurried, the kind of footsteps that did not apologize for the noise they made. The knock on her door was firm. She did not answer. "Miss Elowen," Dorothea's voice, soft and cautious. "There is a gentleman asking for you specifically. I told him you were indisposed, but he said—" A pause. He said he would wait. Elowen closed her eyes. She thought about staying silent. She thought about pulling the curtain across the window and pretending the morning had not started. She had done it before, on worse days than this. She was very practiced at making herself small enough that the world forgot she was there. But something moved in her chest, something she could not name and did not entirely trust. She stood up. She did not reach for a veil. She did not reach for powder or a shawl or any of the things she usually used to make herself less visible. She pulled her hair back simply, smoothed her dress, and opened the door. Dorothea looked at her face and said nothing, but her eyes went soft in the way that made Elowen's throat tighten, because pity was one of the few things she had never learned to accept gracefully. She went down the stairs. He was standing in the entrance hall with his back to her, looking at the portrait of her father that had hung above the fireplace since before she was born. He was taller than she had expected, broad through the shoulders in a way that his coat did not try to hide. His hair was dark and slightly too long, curling at the back of his collar as though he had not had it cut in a while or had simply not thought about it. There was nothing performative about the way he stood. He was not posing. He was simply there, occupying the room with an ease that most men spent their entire lives trying to manufacture. He turned before she reached the bottom step. His name was Calder Ashby, the Duke of Wrencastle, though she had only ever heard him spoken of in rooms she was not supposed to be listening in. He was not particularly known for his warmth. He was known for being difficult, for leaving events early, for saying very little and meaning all of it. He was known, most recently, for having returned from 18 months abroad with a quietness about him that made people nervous in a way they could not properly explain. His eyes found her face immediately. She did not look away. She had made that decision on the stairs, and she held it. For a moment neither of them spoke. She watched him take in the bruise, watched his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly, watched something move behind his eyes that he did not allow anywhere near his expression. He was controlled. She could see that. Everything about him was deliberate. "Miss Elowen," he said. His voice was exactly as she had heard it through the door, low and even, without ceremony. "Your Grace," she said. "I apologize for the hour." She said nothing. She waited. He looked at her steadily. "I am attending the Ashford ball this evening. I would like you to accompany me." The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. Elowen looked at him the way she had learnt to look at people when she needed to understand them before she trusted a single word they said. She had developed this skill over many years and many disappointments, and it had never once let her down. She looked at the set of his mouth, the stillness of his hands, the way he held her gaze without flinching, without filling the quiet with reassurance he did not mean. He was not being kind. He was being direct. She understood the difference. "Why?" she said. It was not a question she was supposed to ask. She knew that. A woman in her position, with her standing, with a bruise on her face and no particular claim to anything, was not supposed to look a duke in the eye and ask him to explain himself. But she had stopped doing what she was supposed to do somewhere around the third or fourth time Thessaly's rings had made their point, and she found she could not go back. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile. It was more like recognition. "Because I was asked to find a woman of honest character," he said, "and every person I spoke to gave me the same name." She did not believe him. She did not disbelieve him either. "You do not know me," she said. "No," he agreed. "That is rather the point." Upstairs she could hear Thessaly moving. The sound of her sister's voice, sweet and carrying, asking Dorothea which of them the Duke had come to see, asking it in the particular tone Thessaly used when she already knew the answer and wanted someone else to suffer hearing it repeated. Elowen looked at the man in front of her. She thought about what the evening would look like. She thought about Thessaly's face. She thought about every ball she had attended in the last 3 years, standing near the wall with a glass she barely touched, watching her sister work the room with the ease of someone who had never once doubted that the room was made for her. She thought about the way people looked through Elowen as though she were part of the furniture. She thought about coming home in a carriage that smelled of her sister's perfume, listening to Thessaly talk all the way back about every man who had paid her attention, every compliment she had received, every door that had opened, simply because she had chosen to walk toward it. She thought about the Duke of Wrencastle standing in her entrance hall before breakfast, asking for her by name. "I will need an hour," Elowen said. He nodded once. "I will wait." She turned and went back up the stairs. She did not hurry. She did not look back. But as she reached the landing, she heard him move, heard the quiet shift of his weight, and she had the strange and unsettling feeling that he was watching her go in the way that people watch things they intended to understand. It was not comfortable. It was not entirely unwelcome either. She stepped into her room and closed the door and stood with her back against it in the grey morning light, her hand still on the handle, her heart beating in a way she could not immediately account for. Through the wall she could hear Thessaly's voice, louder now, no longer sweet. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Elowen did not shrink from the sound of it. She crossed to the mirror. She looked at her face, the bruise, the sharp line of her jaw, the eyes that her mother had once called too serious, and her father had called the most honest thing about her, before he stopped saying kind things altogether. She straightened her spine. She was going to the Ashford ball, and she was going on the arm of a man that her sister had spent 2 seasons trying to reach. She did not let herself smile. Not yet. There was too much she did not know about him, too much that did not yet make sense, too much hanging in the air between them that felt less like opportunity and more like the moment just before something irreversible happens. But she reached for her good dress, and she began to prepare. The dress she reached for was not the finest one she owned. That one belonged to Thessaly now, had been borrowed 18 months ago and never returned, which was how most things in this house moved quietly, without permission, in one direction only. The dress Elowen chose was deep green, simply cut, with nothing remarkable about it except that it had been her mother's once, and she had taken it in herself with small, careful stitches on the nights when the house was quiet. It fit her properly. That was more than she could say for most things. She sat at the mirror and looked at the bruise again. She did not cover it. She had spent the better part of her life covering things. The marks Thessaly left, the tremble in her voice when her father spoke to her in that cold, careful way that was worse than shouting. The ache of sitting through dinner while her sister was praised for her beauty and her grace and her excellent prospects, while Elowen was passed over in the conversation like a word that did not quite fit the sentence. She had learned to fold herself up neatly, to take up very little space, to answer when spoken to and stay quiet when she was not. She had been doing it for so long that she had started to believe it was simply who she was. A small woman, an unimportant one, someone whose name a duke would never ask for. And yet, she pressed her fingers lightly to the bruise and breathed through the sting. Her mother had been dead for 11 years. She had gone quietly, the way she did everything, in the early morning with the curtains drawn. Elowen had been 9 years old, and she had sat beside the bed and held a hand that was already cooling, and she had not cried, not then, because Thessaly was wailing loudly enough in the corridor that there did not seem to be room for anyone else's grief. Their father had remarried within 2 years. The woman he chose was handsome and practical and entirely indifferent to Elowen, which was neither the worst thing nor the best thing, only the most constant. She had a daughter of her own from a previous attachment, a girl named Mercia, who had left for the north at 17 and sent no word back. Their father had never spoken of Mercia, and his new wife had never asked him to. Some silences in that house were so old they had become part of the walls. It was Thessaly who remained. Thessaly, who was 2 years older and several lifetimes more confident, who had their mother's colouring and their father's certainty and absolutely nothing else in common with either of them. Thessaly, who had decided early that the world owed her something and had set about collecting it with both hands. Thessaly, who smiled at the right men and said the right things in the right rooms, and then came home and made sure that Elowen understood, in whatever way was most available to her, that everything good in this house had a single rightful owner. The rings were not the beginning. Elowen knew that. The beginning was much smaller and much earlier, a series of tiny cruelties so ordinary that she had not even recognized them as cruelties at the time. The dress that went missing before a dance, the invitation that Thessaly forgot to pass along, the whispered word in the right ear that meant a young man stopped calling. Small things, each one unremarkable on its own, a pattern only visible from a distance. Elowen had seen the pattern for 3 years now, and had not spoken of it to anyone, because who would she have told? Her father looked at her with the eyes of a man who had long since decided she was not his concern. Dorothea knew, in the way old women who lived in houses knew everything, but Dorothea was loyal to her position, and her position required her to be silent. There was no one else. That was the thing about being invisible. It protected you from nothing. It only meant that when the harm came, it came without witnesses. She stood, smoothed the dress, and opened her bedroom door. Thessaly was in the corridor. She was dressed already, which meant she had been waiting. Her hair was up and her cheeks were flushed, and she was wearing the expression she wore when she was deciding how to handle something she did not like. She looked at Elowen. She looked at the dress. She looked, last of all, at the bruise, and something moved across her face that was not guilt. "You cannot be serious," Thessaly said. Elowen said nothing. "You are going to embarrass us both." Thessaly's voice was low and even. She had learned, over the years, to deliver her worst things quietly. "Look at your face, Elowen. You look like you have been dragged out of a ditch. Whatever he said to you, he was being polite. Men like that do not actually want women like you. They make gestures. It means nothing." Elowen met her sister's Haza. She had learned something in all those years of being small. She had learned how to look at a person and understand exactly what they were afraid of. And she could see it now, clearly, underneath the smooth surface of her sister's composure. Thessaly was afraid. Not of what Elowen might do, of what Elowen might become, simply by walking out of this house on the arm of a man Thessaly could not reach. "Move aside," Elowen said. It was so quiet. She surprised herself. Thessaly's eyes narrowed. For a moment she did not move. Then she stepped back, just slightly, just enough, and Elowen walked past her, without looking back. Downstairs, the Duke was where she had left him. He had not sat down. He was standing near the window now, looking out at the street, and when he heard her on the stairs, he turned. His gaze went to her face again, to the bruise, and then to the dress, and then to her eyes, and he held them there. He did not offer her a compliment. She was grateful for that. "Your carriage," he said simply. She nodded, and she walked to the door that Dorothea held open, and she stepped outside into the cool morning air, and she did not allow herself to feel the full weight of what she was doing until the carriage door closed behind them and the wheels began to move. Then she sat very still and looked at her hands in her lap and breathed. He sat across from her, not beside her. There was a formality to it that she appreciated more than she could have explained, because the last thing she needed from this man, whoever he was, whatever he wanted, was to feel crowded. They rode for several minutes in silence. She became aware, slowly, that the silence did not bother him. Most people could not tolerate silence. They filled it with pleasantries, with observations about the weather, with the small, harmless noise of people who were uncomfortable with their own thoughts. This man sat as though the silence were simply a room he was accustomed to inhabiting. She looked at him. He was looking out the window. She took the opportunity to study him properly for the first time. The line of his jaw, the slight tension around his eyes, not unhappiness exactly, more like a man who had seen a great deal and had not yet decided what to make of most of it. There was something worn about him, not visibly, not in his clothes or his bearing, but in a deeper way, the way certain people wore their experiences not on their faces but somewhere just behind them. She thought about what she knew of him. Not much. She had heard his name in conversation for 2 seasons, always in the context of Thessaly's ambitions, and she had made a point of not paying close attention to anything connected to her sister's ambitions. She knew he had a title and an estate in the north, and that he had been abroad for more than a year. She knew that his return had caused a quiet stir in certain drawing rooms. She did not know why he had left or what had brought him back, or why, of all the women in all the houses in the county, he had come to her door before breakfast and asked for her by name. She still did not believe the reason he had given her. She was not foolish enough to disbelieve it completely either. "You are wondering," he said, without turning from the window. She did not pretend otherwise. "Yes." He looked at her then. "Which part?" "All of it," she said honestly. Something in his expression shifted. It was the same thing she had seen before, that trace of recognition, as though she had confirmed something he had already suspected. He settled back slightly in his seat, not relaxed exactly, but less guarded. "My aunt," he said, "Lady Constance Fairwood. She told me you were the most overlooked woman in 3 counties, and that the first man to actually look at you properly would find someone entirely worth knowing." Elowen stared at him. Lady Fairwood. She knew the name. An older woman, sharp-eyed, who had been kind to her once at a winter gathering 3 years ago, who had sat beside her near the wall and talked to her about books for nearly an hour, and never once looked across the room at Thessaly. She had not thought about that evening in a long time. She had filed it away under the things that were pleasant but did not mean anything, the small accidental kindnesses that life offered, sometimes without consequence. Apparently it had meant something. "Your aunt does not know me," Elowen said. "She knows enough," he said. "She knows character when she sees it. And she has been telling me for 2 seasons that I have been looking in the wrong direction." The carriage hit a slight rut in the road. Neither of them moved. Elowen looked at her hands again. She was trying to organize her thoughts into something sensible, something that did not involve a woman she barely knew and a man she did not know at all, and the dim, dangerous feeling that was beginning to form at the edges of her composure. She did not trust feelings that formed quickly. She had learned that. She did not know yet what he wanted. Not truly. Men with titles and carriages and aunts who spoke well of overlooked women did not simply appear without reason, and reason, in her experience, had very little to do with kindness and a great deal to do with convenience. She was not going to let herself forget that. But she sat in his carriage in her mother's green dress with the bruise still showing on her face, and for the first time in a very long time she did not feel like furniture. She felt, faintly and dangerously, like herself. And that, more than anything else, was what frightened her. The Ashford estate was everything her own home was not. It sat at the end of a long gravel drive, flanked by old elms, the kind of trees that had been there long enough to have opinions, their branches knitting together overhead in a canopy that turned the morning light green and slow. The house itself was pale stone, 4 stories, with windows that caught the sun and gave nothing back. It was not a house that tried to impress you. It simply existed, solidly and without apology, and expected you to adjust to it. Elowen had been here once before, 5 years ago, for a gathering she had attended as Thessaly's shadow. She had stood near a potted plant for the better part of 2 hours, and left without having spoken to anyone who would remember her. She had told herself at the time that it did not matter. She had been very good, back then, at telling herself things did not matter. The carriage stopped. Calder stepped out first and turned to offer his hand without theatre, without the performance that most men made of small courtesies. She took it. His grip was firm and brief, and he released her the moment she was steady, which told her something she filed away without yet knowing what to do with. They walked toward the entrance together. She was aware of the exact moment they were seen. It moved through the gathered guests near the doorway like a current through still water, subtle and immediate, heads turning by fractions, conversations pausing mid-breath. She knew what they were looking at. The Duke they had all been watching for 2 seasons, returned and present, and here and beside him a woman none of them had quite placed, in a green dress with a bruise on her face. She kept her chin level. She had nothing to be ashamed of, and she had decided, somewhere on the gravel drive, that she would carry herself accordingly. Inside, the entrance hall was warm with candles and voices, and within 3 minutes Lady Constance Fairwood had found them. She was smaller than Elowen remembered, slight and upright, with silver hair pinned severely and eyes that moved quickly over everything and missed nothing. She took Elowen's hands before any introduction was offered, held them in her cool, dry grip, and looked at her face with the directness of a woman who had long ago stopped pretending not to see things. "There it is," she said softly, and Elowen understood she was not talking about the bruise. She was talking about the fact that Elowen had come at all. "Lady Fairwood," Elowen said, "you remember me. You spoke to me about books for an hour when no one else was speaking to me at all. I remember everything about that evening." The older woman's expression did something complicated. She pressed Elowen's hands once and released them, then turned to her nephew with a look that was composed entirely of things she was choosing not to say aloud. He received it without reaction. Whatever conversation existed between them had the quality of something long established, the kind of communication that had stopped needing words. "Behave," Lady Fairwood said to him. "I always behave," he said. "You behave according to your own definitions, which is not the same thing." She patted Elowen's arm once. "Come and find me before you leave. There are things I would like to say to you that are better said without an audience." Then she was gone, absorbed back into the crowd with the ease of a woman who had been navigating rooms like this for 60 years. Elowen stood very still for a moment. Calder appeared at her side, not close, but present. "She likes you," he said. "She liked me once for an hour," Elowen said. "That is not the same as liking me. For my aunt, 1 hour is more than most people get." She glanced at him. He was looking out across the room with that steady, unrevealing expression she was beginning to recognize as his default state. Not coldness. Something more considered than that. He looked like a man who had learned to be careful with what he showed people, and she could not yet tell whether that was caution or something that had been taught by damage. She knew something about both. The morning unfolded in the way that gatherings of this kind always did, slowly and with a great deal of circling. People came to speak to Calder and spoke to her peripherally, with the polished courtesy of those who have not yet decided what category to place you in. She answered simply, and watched them, and stored everything she observed. She had always been good at that. When you spent most of your life near walls, you learned to read a room the way other people learned to read a page. It was in the middle of a conversation about the upcoming season, which she was not truly part of, that she saw Thessaly arrive. Her sister came through the entrance in a gown the colour of champagne, and she moved through the doorway with that particular quality she had of seeming to fill whatever room she entered, not because of her size, but because of her certainty. 2 women turned to look. A man near the fireplace straightened almost imperceptibly. Thessaly's eyes swept the room in the way they always did, performing casualness while conducting a thorough inventory, and then they found Elowen. The pause was brief, less than a second. Thessaly's composure was excellent, but Elowen had been watching her sister for 23 years. She saw it. Calder noticed the shift in her attention. He followed her gaze across the room and said nothing, but she felt the air beside her change in some small way she could not measure. "My sister," she said, before he could ask. He said nothing. "She will come to speak to you," Elowen said. "She has been attempting to, for 2 seasons. I thought you should know that before she arrives." He looked at her then. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because you brought me here without explaining yourself fully, and that means we are in some kind of arrangement I do not yet understand. And I would rather you have accurate information than find yourself surprised." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You do not trust easily." "I trust evidence," she said. "I do not have enough of it yet." Something moved in his eyes. Not offence. The opposite, actually. "That is a reasonable position." "I am frequently reasonable," she said. "It is one of the things no one has ever found particularly attractive about me." It came out more honestly than she intended. She felt the edge of it and kept her expression still. He looked at her for a long moment. "I find it considerably more interesting than the alternative," he said, and then he turned back to the room, and she was left with the words sitting somewhere in her chest, trying to decide what to do with them. Thessaly arrived 12 minutes later. She came with a smile that Elowen knew the precise dimensions of, warm and wide and manufactured at a depth of about 3 inches. She addressed Calder with the kind of easy delight that took years of practice to make look effortless, and he received it with the same courteous steadiness with which he seemed to receive everything. Polite. Utterly impenetrable. "And Elowen," Thessaly said, turning to her with an expression of fond surprise, as though she had not seen her in weeks rather than hours. "You came after all. How brave." The word sat there between them. Brave. She had chosen it with precision, the way she always chose things, wrapping the diminishment inside something that sounded like its opposite. "I was invited," Elowen said simply. Thessaly's smile did not waver. It never wavered. That was one of the things about her. The smile was the last thing to go, and it only went when there were no witnesses. She stayed for 7 minutes. She laughed at something Calder said, which had not been intended as a joke. She touched her own hair twice. She looked at Elowen's bruise once, quickly, with an expression of distant concern that would have read as sympathy to anyone who did not know her. When she finally moved away, drawn by someone across the room, Elowen released a breath she had been holding for the better part of those 7 minutes. "She did that to you," Calder said. It was not a question. She looked at him. His eyes were on her face, on the bruise, and his expression was that same controlled stillness. But underneath it, if she looked carefully, if she used the particular attention she had developed over years of needing to read people accurately, there was something else, something with edges. She did not confirm it, she did not deny it, she looked away. "It is not your concern," she said. "Perhaps not," he said. And yet, she waited for him to finish the sentence. He did not. That and yet stayed in the air between them, unresolved and deliberate, and she did not know what to do with it, and she could tell that he knew she did not know, and she found, to her own unease, that she did not like being the one without information. He was doing it intentionally. She was almost certain of it. The afternoon moved on. They were seated for luncheon at a long table that placed her, by some arrangement she had not made, 2 seats from him. Close enough, not beside him. She talked to the woman on her left about gardens, and she half listened to the conversation happening around Calder, and twice she looked up and found him already looking at her with that expression that told her nothing and asked her everything. After luncheon, Lady Fairwood found her near the south window. She dispensed with preamble in the manner of someone with limited patience for it. "He has not looked at anyone like that in 2 years, she said. "I am certain I do not know what you mean." "You are certain you do." Lady Fairwood turned to stand beside her, both of them looking out at the garden. "He was engaged once, 2 years and 3 months ago. The woman was perfectly suitable and entirely wrong for him, and he knew it and went ahead anyway, which is a very male sort of logic. The engagement ended badly. He has not told me the full of it, and I have not pressed, but he came back from abroad different, not broken, recalibrated." A pause. "He does not ask for things he does not mean to see through." Elowen was quiet. "I want you to understand that," Lady Fairwood said, "because you are going to be tempted to dismiss this. Everything in your history has trained you to expect to be overlooked, and when you are not overlooked, your instinct will be to find the deception in it." She said nothing. "There may not be one," the old woman said simply. "That is all I wanted to say." She left. Elowen stood at the window with the afternoon light falling across the bruise on her face, and the words settling into her like stones into water, slow and irreversible. She looked across the room. Calder was in conversation with 2 men near the fireplace, but even as she found him, he turned his head. Their eyes met across the full length of that room. He held her gaze. She looked away first. Her heart was doing something she had not given it permission to do, and there was a question forming in the back of her mind, quiet and persistent, the kind of question that once asked could not be unasked. He had been engaged before. It had ended badly. He had gone abroad and come back recalibrated, which was a careful word for something that sounded like it had cost him a great deal. And his aunt had sent him to her door. She did not understand all of it yet. What she understood was that this day was not what she had thought it was when she came down the stairs this morning, and the man across the room was not what she had assumed when she first saw him standing in her entrance hall. And she was no longer certain, in the way she had always previously been certain, that she knew how this was going to end. That uncertainty was either the most dangerous thing she had felt in years, or it was the most honest. She had not yet decided which. The evening portion of the gathering was different from the afternoon, in the way that candlelight was different from daylight. It softened some things and made others sharper, and the people in the room seemed to understand this instinctively, moving closer together speaking lower, the whole atmosphere pulling inward like a held breath. Elowen stood near the edge of the main room and watched it happen. She had been watching rooms like this for years without ever truly being part of them, and she was aware that tonight was different, that she was not standing near the wall out of habit or invisibility, but out of choice, taking a moment to collect herself before the evening moved into whatever it was going to become. That was a distinction that mattered to her. There was a difference between being pushed to the edges and choosing to stand there. She was only beginning to understand how much of her life she had allowed those two things to look identical. Calder had been in conversation near the far end of the room for the last half hour. She had not sought him out. She told herself this was sensible. She told herself she was not the kind of woman who tracked a man's movements through a room simply because he had said something she could not stop turning over in her mind. She was not certain she believed herself. Lady Fairwood's words had not left her. He does not ask for things he does not mean to see through. She had been pressing on that sentence the way you pressed on a bruise, testing the pain of it, trying to understand what it meant for her specifically, because she had been asked for things before. She had been used as a convenience before, a placeholder, a background presence that suited someone else's purposes. Her father had done it. Thessaly had done it her entire life. She had learned to identify the shape of it, the particular texture of being valued for your usefulness rather than yourself. This felt different. She could not afford to trust that feeling. She knew that. She trusted it anyway, partially, provisionally, the way you trusted the first step of an unfamiliar staircase. You put your weight on it. You stayed ready to pull back. Thessaly appeared at her side without warning. She had a glass in her hand, and her smile was the evening version, slightly warmer, slightly less precise, calibrated for candlelight and an audience that was paying less careful attention. She stood beside Elowen and looked out at the room and said nothing for a moment, and Elowen felt the familiar tightening in her chest that her sister's proximity always produced. The body's memory of things, the mind tried to file away as finished. He spoke to Lord Ashford for 20 minutes, Thessaly said conversationally. Did you know that? Elowen said nothing. About you. Thessaly turned the glass slowly in her fingers. Well, not about you specifically. About your family. About Father's situation. A pause. You did not know Father had a situation, did you? The words landed with the precision Thessaly intended. Elowen kept her face still. Say what you are saying. Thessaly made a small sound that was adjacent to concern and nowhere near it. Father owes money. More than I knew, which means more than anyone knew, which means it has been going on for some time. The estate is in a worse state than it appears. She sipped from her glass. Lord Ashford mentioned it to the Duke, apparently, because they are old friends and these things come up. A pause. I thought you should hear it from me. She let that sit. Elowen understood what was happening. She had watched Thessaly operate for long enough to recognize the mechanics of it. This was not kindness. This was a grenade handed to her in the form of information, designed to do one specific thing, to make her doubt, to make her look at Calder's interest in her and ask what it was actually about, to replace the fragile, unfamiliar feeling of being genuinely seen with the older, more familiar feeling of being used. It was elegantly done. She gave her sister that. Thank you, Elowen said. Thessaly blinked. She had expected something else. She had expected the colour to drain from Elowen's face, had expected the visible flinch of a woman whose hope had just been punctured. That was how it usually went. Thessaly provided the damage, and Elowen provided the reaction, and the evening continued. I mean it, Elowen said. Thank you for telling me. She stepped away. She walked to the far end of the room steadily, not quickly, not away from anything, towards something. She stopped near the windows that looked out onto the garden, where the last of the light was fading from the sky and the first stars were beginning to appear. And she stood and breathed and thought very clearly and carefully about what she was going to do next. Her father owed money. She did not know how much. She did not know the shape of it or how long it had been building. What she knew was that Thessaly had held this information back long enough to deploy it here, tonight, in this room, at the exact moment it would cause the most damage, which meant her sister had known for some time, and chosen her moment with the patience of someone who understood timing as a weapon. The other thing she knew was this. If Calder had asked Lord Ashford about her family, he had done it deliberately. He had come to their house that morning, already knowing something, or wanting to know something, and what she could not yet tell was whether his interest in her was separate from her father's troubles or connected to them in a way that changed everything. She needed to know which. She turned from the window. He was standing 6 feet away. She did not know when he had crossed the room. He was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, something quieter than his usual composure, something that had more at its edges. "Your sister spoke to you," he said. "Yes. I can tell by the way you are standing." She looked at him directly. "You spoke to Lord Ashford about my family." He did not deny it or deflect it. He held her gaze and said, "Yes." "Why?" The word was not angry. It was precise. She needed a precise answer, and she was asking for one, and she was not going to accept anything that sidestepped it. He was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone constructing a careful lie, the silence of someone deciding how much of the truth to offer and in what order. "Because I was told your father's circumstances were deteriorating," he said, "and I wanted to understand the situation before I proceeded." "Proceeded with what?" He looked at her steadily. "With this." The word was simple, unembellished. It sat between them and meant everything it could mean, and she did not yet know which meaning was the right one. She took a breath. "My father's debts are not mine." "I know that, and I am not available to be a solution to a financial arrangement dressed as something else." Something moved in his expression. Not offence, something more like pain, briefly, before the composure came back. "That is not what this is." "Then tell me what it is," she said, plainly, without the patience and the careful silences and the things you leave unfinished. "Tell me what you want from me plainly, because I have spent my entire life having things taken from me in ways that were never named, and I cannot do this unless it is named." The room moved around them. Somewhere behind her, Thessaly was laughing at something. The sound carrying across the candlelight with its usual effortless brightness. A string quartet in the adjoining room had begun to play. The evening was continuing as evenings did, indifferent to the particular weight of 2 people standing at its edge. Calder looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I am 34 years old. I have spent most of my adult life in rooms full of people who want things from me, and none of those things have ever been my actual company. I went abroad because I needed to be somewhere that did not know my name and did not require anything from it. I came back because my aunt wrote to me every 2 weeks for 18 months until I did, and in every second letter she mentioned a woman she had met for 1 hour who had been standing near a wall at a winter gathering, and had talked to her about books with the complete attention of someone who was actually interested, and who had said nothing false the entire time." He paused. "I am not interested in your father's debts," he said. "I am not interested in your sister, or your family's standing, or what any of this looks like from outside. I came to your door this morning because my aunt told me I had been looking in the wrong places, and I believed her, and I was right to believe her." Elowen was very still. Her chest was full of something she did not entirely have a name for. It was not simple. It was not the clean, bright feeling she might have expected. It was complicated and cautious, and it had years of careful self-protection wrapped around it. And underneath all of that, quiet and stubborn and refusing to be entirely extinguished, was something that felt dangerously close to belief. "You do not know me," she said. It came out softer than before. I know that you came down those stairs this morning with a bruise on your face and did not cover it, he said quietly. I know that you told me your sister's history without being asked because you thought I needed accurate information. I know that you ate almost nothing at luncheon because you were too busy watching the room. And I know that when my aunt spoke to you near the south window, you stood very still in the way people stand when they are trying not to let something matter too much. I have been watching you all day, Elowen, and I know considerably more than you have given me credit for. The use of her name without her title was not accidental. She felt it, she looked at him, and she thought about all the reasons not to believe this. She thought about her father and his debts, and the way this man had made inquiries before arriving at her door, which could mean caution or could mean calculation, and she could not yet be certain which. She thought about the engagement that had ended badly, and the 18 months abroad, and the word recalibrated, which meant that something in him had been broken and reset, and she did not know yet what shape it had been reset into. She thought about Thessaly standing in the corridor that morning. She thought about the green dress that had been her mother's. She thought about 23 years of being the woman in the background, the one nobody asked for, the one who learned to make herself invisible because the alternative was being seen and hurt. I am not easy, she said. I want you to know that from the beginning. I am not going to be easy to know or easy to trust, and I am going to question things that other women would accept, and I am not going to apologize for any of it. I am not looking for easy, he said. You say that now. I say it because I mean it. The quietness of his voice did not shift. It was the most consistent thing about him. I have had easy. It did not suit me. She looked at him. He looked at her. Behind them, the music continued, and the room continued, and Thessaly was somewhere in it, watching. She was certain of that. She could feel the specific quality of her sister's attention, like a change in air pressure. And somewhere across the house, her father's debts existed in a ledger she had never seen, and nothing about this was simple or clean or safe. But he was standing in front of her, with his hands still at his sides, and his eyes on her face, and he was not looking at the bruise. He was looking at her. Tell me about your aunt, she said finally. Tell me how she managed to write to you every 2 weeks for 18 months and still have things to say. Something changed in his face. It was the smallest thing, a release somewhere around his eyes, something that had been held carefully for a very long time, loosening just slightly. She is the most relentlessly observant person I have ever known, he said, which is possibly why she reminded me of you. It was the closest thing to warmth she had heard from him all day. She was not ready to let herself have it. Not fully, not yet. There was too much she did not know, and too much at stake, and she had been this close to hope before, and learned the particular cost of it. But she stayed where she was. She did not step back. And when the music shifted, and someone nearby suggested moving to the adjoining room, and the evening reshuffled itself around them, she fell into step beside him, without quite deciding to, and he did not remark on it. And they walked together into the next room, where the candles were brighter and the music was warmer, and the night was not yet finished with them. Across the room, Thessaly watched them go. Her glass was still in her hand. Her smile was still in place. But her eyes, for just a moment, were completely unguarded, and what was in them was not anger. It was something older and more corrosive than that. Elowen did not see it, but she would. The adjoining room was warmer, and the music was closer, and the candles had been lit in clusters rather than rows, which made the whole space feel more intimate than the evening had any right to be. Elowen stood near the edge of the dancing, and watched 2 couples move through the opening figures of a reel, and thought about what had just happened in the other room, and tried to arrange it into something she could hold steadily. She was not succeeding particularly well. The conversation had done something to the careful structure she kept around herself, had found a seam in it and pressed, and she was aware of the seam in a way she had not been before. Calder stood beside her, near enough that she was conscious of him, far enough that there was still air between them. "Do you dance?" he said. "I know how to," she said. "That is not the same as yes." "It is not," he agreed. "Do you want to?" She looked at the floor. The couples were easy in each other's company, moving with the particular looseness of people who were enjoying themselves without thinking about it. She could not remember the last time she had danced at something like this. Thessaly danced. Thessaly was very good at it, had made certain she was very good at it, because dancing required a partner, and partners required choosing. And Thessaly had always understood that being chosen publicly was its own kind of currency. Elowen had stopped putting herself in positions where she could be publicly not chosen. "Not yet," she said. He nodded and said nothing more about it. That was the thing she kept returning to, the way he did not press. She was accustomed to men who filled silences with themselves, who took her hesitation as an invitation to explain why she should not hesitate, who confused persistence with interest. He simply waited, and the waiting was not passive. It had a quality of attention to it, the same quality she had noticed in the carriage that morning, the sense that he was present in a way most people were not. She was not going to let herself find that extraordinary. She was going to observe it carefully and store it and withhold judgment until she had more evidence. That was what she had decided. She was finding it increasingly difficult to do. The trouble was that she believed him. That was the core of it, the thing she could not get around, no matter how many times she applied her best skepticism to it. She believed that he had come to her door because his aunt had told him to. She believed that he had spent the day watching her with genuine attention rather than performed interest. She believed, and this was the most dangerous one, that when he looked at her he was seeing something he actually wanted to see. She had not been believed in for a long time. It turned out that was a difficult thing to be offered without wanting it. She became aware of Thessaly entering the room. She did not see her. She felt her in the way she always felt her, in the particular adjustment her body made when her sister was in the same space. A tightening, a slight reorientation, the way a plant turned toward light, except the opposite of that. Thessaly moved through the room with a purpose that Elowen recognized. She had a destination. She was not circulating or socializing or doing any of the usual things. She was moving towards something specific, and within 30 seconds Elowen understood what it was. Lord Pemberton. He was an older man, heavy-set and self-important, who served on 2 county committees and had the kind of local influence that was not dramatic enough to be interesting, but was wide enough to be useful. He and Elowen's father had known each other for years. He was exactly the kind of man Thessaly would never ordinarily spend time on, which meant she was not spending time on him for ordinary reasons. Elowen watched. She watched Thessaly lean in close to say something, watched Pemberton's expression shift, a small surprised movement, then a settling into something more serious. Watched him nod. Watched Thessaly touch his arm briefly, just once, just enough, the way she always calculated physical contact, and then step back and move away as though the conversation had been nothing. It had not been nothing. Elowen did not know yet what it had been. She found out within the hour. She had stepped away from Calder briefly to speak to a woman she knew slightly from a charitable committee the previous winter, and she was making her way back through the edge of the room when she heard her father's name. Not loudly. In the particular low register of people who are discussing something they consider too interesting to keep to themselves, but too sensitive to say at full volume. She stopped where she was. 2 women, standing close together near a floral arrangement. Neither of them knew she was there. She was very good at not being noticed. What she heard in the next 2 minutes reorganized everything. Her father's debts were not a private embarrassment quietly mounting in a ledger. They were known. They had been known for some time. Pemberton had apparently said something to someone who had said something to someone else, and the shape of it was this. The estate was mortgaged past what it could sustain. Her father had made investments over the past 4 years that had failed consecutively, and each time he had borrowed to cover the previous loss, which was the particular kind of logic that produced a very efficient disaster. The number involved was not a number a family of their standing could recover from without significant intervention. Thessaly knew all of this, had known for at least 3 months. And Thessaly's plan, it appeared, had been to marry well enough to either resolve it or remove herself from it, and the Duke of Wrencastle had been the primary candidate in that plan. And that plan had just walked into the other room beside her sister in a green dress and complicated everything. Elowen stood very still. The 2 women moved away, and their voices faded, and she was left in the sudden quiet of understanding something fully that she had only half understood before. Thessaly had not hit her out of cruelty, or not only out of cruelty. She had hit her the night before because Elowen had done something, had said something, had been in the way of something, in a situation that Thessaly now understood was far more high stakes than a matter of pride. The rings had come out because Thessaly was frightened. That did not excuse it. It explained the particular force of it. She thought about the morning, called her at the door. Thessaly, scrambling for her dress before the name had finished being spoken. She had been in the way. She was still in the way. And now Thessaly had said something to Pemberton that was designed to do damage, and she did not yet know exactly what shape that damage was going to take, but she could feel it forming somewhere in the room, the way you felt weather changing before you could name it. She found Calder. He was in conversation, and he looked up when she appeared, and something in her face made him end the conversation with a brief word and turn to her fully. "Something has happened," she said. "Tell me," she told him. Not quickly, not in a rush. She told him clearly and in order, because that was how she processed things, linearly, with the emotion held to the side until the facts were established. She told him about the debts and what she had overheard, and about Thessaly and Pemberton, and the particular way her sister had moved through the room with a destination. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Your father's debt is 42,000. She stared at him. "I know the number," he said. "I found it out this morning when I spoke to Ashford. It is why I wanted to understand the situation before proceeding, not because it changes my interest in you, because I needed to know what I was walking into." She found her voice. "You knew." "Yes. You knew all day, and you did not tell me. I did not tell you because it was not my information to deliver, and I was not certain of all the details, and I did not want to hand you something half-formed." A pause. "I should have told you sooner. I understand if that damages your trust in me, and I am not going to argue against it." She looked at him. He was doing it again, that thing she could not guard against. Owning the error, without defense, without redirection, without the performance of remorse, that was actually a request for forgiveness. Just the plain acknowledgement of a man who knew when he had gotten something wrong. It did not make her less upset, but it made it considerably harder to stay upset in the direction of him, rather than the situation. "What did Thessaly say to Pemberton?" she said. "I do not know yet." He looked across the room briefly. "But I intend to find out." She put her hand on his arm before she had decided to. Just briefly. "No," she said. "Do not go and have a conversation on my behalf that I have not asked for. I am not fragile, and I am not someone who needs managing." He looked down at her hand, and then at her face, and something in him was very still. "I know that," he said quietly. "Then let me handle my sister." He held her gaze for a moment, and then nodded once, and she removed her hand, and she turned and crossed the room. Thessaly was near the fireplace, with a small glass and a larger audience. She saw Elowen coming, and her expression did the thing it did, the smooth readjustment, the smile arriving precisely on time. Elowen did not give the audience time to become a factor. "Excuse us," she said, pleasantly and without question, and she took Thessaly's arm and walked her the 6 steps to the edge of the room where the firelight did not reach, and the nearest person was too far away to hear a quiet conversation. Thessaly removed her arm with a small, precise movement. Elowen, you spoke to Pemberton. I speak to many people. It is called being sociable. You might try it. You told him about father. Thessaly's eyes were steady. They were always steady. That was the thing about her sister that most people never understood, the stillness of her. Thessaly felt things as deeply as anyone, perhaps more deeply, but she had constructed over many years a perfect surface through which almost nothing passed visibly. It was an achievement in its way. I told him what is true, Thessaly said. You told him in this room, tonight, where it would travel. Information travels. That is its nature. Thessaly, her voice was low. Stop. Something shifted. It was small. A tightening around her sister's eyes, a barely perceptible adjustment, the kind of thing Elowen could see because she had been looking at Thessaly's face for 23 years. He is not going to save us, Thessaly said. Her voice had dropped. The performance was thinner now. Whatever you think is happening here, he is not going to choose you and solve everything. Men like that do not choose women like you, Elowen. They make gestures. They have moments of unusual interest. And then they remember what they actually need, and they go and find it. You mean they choose women like you? Elowen said. Pause. I mean they choose women who know how to be chosen, Thessaly said. And for a moment, just one, the voice underneath was not cruel. It was tired. It was the voice of a woman who had been operating on calculation and fear for a long time and was exhausted by it. Elowen looked at her sister, really looked at her. Saw, for the first time in a long time, not the rings and the smile and the careful movements, but the person underneath all of it. The girl who had also lost a mother at an age when it left marks, who had also grown up in a house with a father who looked through his daughters when something more important was occupying his attention, who had simply chosen a different survival strategy. Aggression instead of invisibility, forward instead of inward. She did not forgive her. She was not going to stand here and forgive her. There was a bruise on her face, and there had been many other bruises before it, and forgiveness was not something she owed quickly or cheaply. But she understood her. In this moment, in this particular light, she understood her. I am not trying to save anyone, Elowen said. I am not trying to solve the debts or rescue the family or position myself strategically. I am trying to exist as a person in this room without having the ground cut from under me every time I take a step. She paused. And I am asking you, once, plainly, to stop. Thessaly looked at her. She looked at her for a long time. Then she looked away, which was the closest thing to an answer Elowen was going to receive tonight, and she moved back toward the firelight, and the smile came back, and the evening continued. Elowen stayed where she was for a moment. Then she turned. Calder was where she had left him. He had not moved closer. He had not intervened. He had simply remained, visible, present, unhurried, in the way she was beginning to understand was simply how he was. She walked back to him. It is handled, she said. I know, he said. I watched. She looked at him. And you did not need me, he said, which is exactly what I expected. She stood beside him in the warm candlelight with the music playing and the room turning around them, and she thought about what she expected of this, of him, of what came next. She thought about the morning, and the stairs, and the carriage, and the whole extraordinary weight of the day. My father's situation is not going to resolve itself, she said quietly. No, he agreed, it is not. And I am not going to pretend it is not real. I am not asking you to. She looked at him. What are you asking me? He was quiet for a moment. Then, simply, to let this continue, whatever this is, to let it continue without deciding in advance how it ends. She held his gaze. 23 years of knowing exactly how things ended for women like her, exactly where they stood and who they were to people, and what they could reasonably expect from a room full of better options. And this man, standing in the candlelight, steady and unhurried, asking her not to end something before it had fully started. I make no promises, she said. I am not asking for promises, he said. I am asking for time. She looked away. She looked at the room. She looked at Thessaly near the fireplace, composure restored, performing effortlessly. She looked at the couple still dancing, still easy, still without the weight of what she had been carrying her entire adult life. She looked back at him. Then you have it, she said. For now. He nodded. And the smallest thing happened in his eyes, the release she had seen before, that loosening, that careful, quiet shift of something long held. She felt it in her chest, like a key turning in a lock she had not known she was keeping. She was not ready. She might not be ready for a long time. There was too much that was unresolved, and too much that was unknown, and the bruise on her face was still aching in the warm room, and her father's debts were sitting in the world like a problem she had not asked for. And Thessaly was 20 feet away, being brilliant at survival. But she was standing in this room on her own terms, in her mother's green dress, with a man beside her who had spent an entire day watching her the way people watched things they intended to understand. And she was, for the first time in longer than she could accurately remember, exactly where she had chosen to be. That was not nothing. It was, in fact, everything. The evening ended quietly. Not in the way that evenings ended when they had been unremarkable, fading out of their own lack of consequence, but in the particular way that evenings ended when they had carried too much to sustain at full intensity. The music slowed, the candles burned lower, people began to collect their things with the unhurried ease of those who had been well fed and well entertained, and were ready to carry the pleasantness of it home. Elowen stood in the entrance hall and waited for her cloak and thought about the day from its beginning, from the wet cloth and the mirror and the decision she had made before the sun came up. And she found that she could not quite connect that woman to this one. They were the same person. She knew that. But something had shifted in the hours between, something fundamental and not entirely nameable, and she was aware of it the way you were aware of a change in the weather. Not dramatic, undeniable. Calder appeared beside her with her cloak already in his hands. She looked at him. He held it out without comment, without ceremony, and she turned and let him settle it over her shoulders, and his hands rested there for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, just briefly. Just enough that she was aware of the warmth of them through the fabric, and then he stepped back. She did not say anything. Neither did he. They walked out into the night together. The air was cool and clean and smelled of the old elms and the damp grass beyond the drive. The stars were properly out now, unobstructed, more of them than you could ever see in the city, and Elowen tipped her face up slightly as they walked, and let the cold touch the bruise on her cheek, and felt, oddly, nothing but the stars. The carriage was waiting. She stopped before they reached it. He stopped too, without being asked, and turned to look at her. And she looked back at him in the dark, with the house lights behind him, and the drive stretching ahead, and the whole long, strange wait of the day between them. I want to ask you something, she said, and I want you to answer it honestly, even if you think the honest answer will complicate things. All right, he said. If my father had no debts, she said, if there were no situation, no 42,000, no estate in difficulty, if I was simply a woman standing near a wall at a winter gathering talking about books, would you be standing here? He did not answer immediately. She respected that. A fast answer would have been a performed one. He looked at her for a moment in the dark, and then he said, My aunt has been writing to me for 2 seasons about a woman who talked to her about books with complete attention and said nothing false. She wrote about it before the debts became what they are now, when your family's situation was unremarkable and your name would not have drawn any particular interest. She wrote about it because she found it singular. A pause. So yes, I would be standing here. Elowen held his gaze. She believed him. She believed him not because she was naive or because the evening had softened her judgment or because she wanted something to be true so badly that she bent her perception toward it. She believed him because she was very good at understanding people, and she had been watching him carefully for 12 hours, and he was consistent in a way that could not be manufactured. His actions and his words and his silences all pointed in the same direction. She had not found a seam. "All right," she said. He waited. "I am not going to be simple," she said. "I told you that this morning, and I meant it. I have years of practice at expecting the worst from people, and I am not going to stop being careful just because one day has gone better than I anticipated." "I am not asking you to stop being careful," he said. "I am only asking to be in the category of things you are careful about, rather than things you have already decided." She looked at him. The night was very quiet. Somewhere in the trees, something small moved and was still. "You are in that category," she said. "You have been since the carriage." Something in him settled. It was visible even in the dark, that same loosening around his eyes, and she understood now that it was what Calder looked like when he had stopped bracing for something. They got into the carriage. The ride back was different from the morning. The morning had been careful, 2 people taking the measure of each other with the particular wariness of those who had learned that wariness was sensible. This was quieter. The city lights moved past the window, and they sat across from each other in the dark and said very little, but the silence had changed its quality entirely. It was no longer the silence of people managing their distance. It was the silence of people who had agreed, without using the words for it, to be in the same place. She looked at her hands. She thought about her mother's dress. She had worn it today, without knowing entirely why, only that it had seemed right, had seemed like the version of herself she wanted to bring to whatever the day was going to be. Her mother had been a quiet woman. Not invisible, not crushed, but naturally still the kind of person who occupied space without requiring it to acknowledge her. Elowen had spent years thinking she had inherited this as a limitation. She was beginning to understand it might be something else entirely. Her mother had also been the kind of woman who noticed things, who remembered a face from a single meeting, who talked about books with strangers for an hour and left an impression that lasted years. Lady Fairwood had spent an hour with Elowen and written about it in letters for 2 seasons. She had not known that until today. She thought about all the things that had happened without her knowing, the letter writing, the nephew abroad. The patient, persistent effort of an old woman who had looked at her for an hour at a winter gathering and decided she was worth something. She felt, unexpectedly, the sting of tears. She did not let them come, not here. But she felt them, the pressure of them, and she understood what they were about. Not sadness, exactly. Something more like the particular relief of being seen by someone who had nothing to gain from seeing you. The carriage stopped at her door. Dorothea had left the lamp burning in the entrance. The house was quiet and dark above the ground floor, which meant Thessaly was either not yet home or already in her room with the door closed, and either way Elowen was grateful for the absence. She stepped out. Calder stepped out too. He walked with her to the door, which she did not have to do, and she did not tell him not to. They stood on the step in the lamplight, and she looked at him one more time and thought about the morning, the whole length of the day, the Ashford estate, and the candlelight, and the conversation near the fireplace, and the moment she had put her hand on his arm and meant it. "Thank you," she said, "for today." "It was not a favour," he said. I know, thank you anyway. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, I am going to call tomorrow, if that is acceptable. She thought about saying that she needed time. She thought about all the reasons a pause would be sensible, all the ways moving quickly had cost her before, all the careful architecture of self-protection she had built over years that said, wait, that said, be sure, that said, do not let one good day dismantle everything you have constructed to keep yourself intact. She thought about standing near walls for 3 years. It is acceptable, she said. He nodded once. And then, without the performance of it, without reaching for her hand or making it into a moment, he simply looked at her face, at the bruise, at the jaw it ran along, and his expression did the thing it did, that controlled tightening, the thing that was not pity and was not nothing. It will fade, she said. Yes, he said, and I am still angry about it. She held his gaze. She knew what it cost him to say it that plainly, knew from everything she had learned today about how carefully he managed what he allowed to show. He had chosen to let this be visible. He had chosen deliberately to be a person who was angry on her behalf because what had been done to her warranted anger, and he was not going to perform equanimity about it simply because equanimity was easier. She did not have words for what that meant to her. She did not try to find them. Good night, she said. Good night, Elowen. She went inside. She stood in the entrance hall in the lamplight and listened to the carriage move away down the street, and she breathed, and she let herself feel the full weight of what the day had been. Not piece by piece, not managed and filed, but all of it together. The morning, the mirror, the stairs, the long carriage ride. Thessaly's face when she had said move aside, and Thessaly had moved. Lady Fairwood's dry, precise voice, the fireplace, and the conversation, and the candlelight, and the music, the drive, and the stars. The way he had said good night. The way he had said her name. She pressed her back against the closed door, the way she had that morning, and she stood in the quiet house, and she breathed. Things were not resolved. She knew that. Her father's debts were real, and the estate was in trouble, and Thessaly was whatever Thessaly was, and none of the circumstances that surrounded her life had changed, because she had spent one extraordinary day with a man who watched her carefully. None of it was simple. Most of it was still frightening. But she was standing in her own entrance hall, in her mother's dress, and she had looked her sister in the eye and said, "Stop," and she had told the Duke plainly what she would and would not accept, and she had ridden home in the dark, in a silence that was not empty, but full of something new and fragile and worth being careful with. She straightened. She took off her cloak and hung it herself, and carried the lamp up the stairs and went into her room and sat down at the mirror. The bruise was still there. It would be for a while. She looked at it without flinching, the way she had looked at it this morning, but the feeling was different. This morning it had been something she needed to decide what to do with. Now it was simply part of the day she had had, part of where she had been and how she had stood in it. She thought about tomorrow. She thought about the door opening and a carriage on the street and the careful, steady sound of footsteps that did not apologize for themselves. She thought about how much she did not know yet, about him, about the engagement that had ended and the months abroad and the things that had made him quiet in a way that made people nervous, about what his life looked like up close and whether she was ready to be close to it, and what it would cost her if this too turned out to be something other than what it appeared. She thought about those things clearly and honestly, and she did not pretend they were small. And then she thought about Lady Fairwood standing beside her at the window, small and upright and entirely certain, saying there may not be a deception. That is all I wanted to say. She reached up and touched the bruise gently. Then she reached for her hair and unpinned it, and let it fall, and looked at herself in the mirror, not at the mark, just at herself, and she stayed there for a moment in the lamplight. Her father had a daughter. He had never thought to ask for anything. Her sister had a rival she had never thought to consider. And somewhere across the city, in a house she had never seen, a man who had spent 18 months abroad, becoming someone quieter and more careful, was, she believed, also sitting somewhere in the dark thinking about tomorrow. She blew out the lamp. She lay down in the dark and pulled the blanket up and listened to the house settle around her. She did not tell herself that everything was going to be fine. She had never been the kind of person who found that kind of telling useful. She told herself instead what she knew for certain, that she had walked down a staircase this morning towards something she did not understand, and she had not turned back. That she had been seen today, properly, by more than one person, and she had not collapsed under the weight of it, or flinched away from it, or found a reason to make herself smaller. That she had stood in a room with her sister and her bruise, and a man she did not yet fully understand, and she had been, throughout all of it, entirely herself. That was what she knew. That was, she thought, enough to build from. She closed her eyes. Outside the window, the city was still doing what cities did at this hour, its distant sounds faint and continuous, and the night was cool through the glass. And somewhere at the edge of sleep she thought about a green dress and a carriage, and a voice that was low and even, and said her name without ceremony. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, she did not lie awake waiting for the other thing to arrive. She simply slept.